of our energy democracy program. And then we can pass it off to our esteemed panelists. So Emily is going to keep track. She's going to make sure that I don't drone on too long here. So here's what do we have today for our energy system? And mostly I'm talking about electric energy. We're not really talking about gas and heating right now, unless you heat with electricity. I'm talking about the electricity system. So what we have today is sort of a vestige of 100 years ago. We have a system of wires, we have a system of electric power generation, and we have ways to distribute that electricity to homes and businesses. And so the way that we set this up 100 years ago was mostly a monopoly. You wouldn't want to have multiple sets of wires crisscrossing the country, competing with each other. So you've got one set of wires, and basically the regulatory compact was a business that was going to make these big investments in big centralized large electric generation power stations and big poles and wires investments. In exchange for making that investment and providing that service to customers, we decided to generally have a monopoly system where we regulate those companies that provide that service. And so generally in most states, what we're doing is having a state regulator who regulates prices. That's the electric utility rates and fees that they charge customers. And the reason for this is because of the lack of competition. Though noted on the slide here, in the late 90s, we started to see some little bits and pieces of competition creeping into our electricity system in this country. So we have some regional wholesale competitive markets for power generation. Virginia is in one of those markets. It's called PJM. It includes 13 states. Other states like Texas are sort of an island unto themselves, where they have competitive generation and competitive retail sales. And so Virginia had a brief experiment in the year from 2000 to 2007 with actual retail competition, where you, the customer, could select your own provider. But we stopped that in 2007 and went back to our system that we have today, where in Virginia we have a competition in power generation, but we also have vertically integrated monopoly utilities like your Dominions, like your Appalachian Powers. And at the end of the day, customers like you and I do not have any choice over our retail electric service provider. We're stuck with whoever serves the city or the town that we live in. So next slide, please. Here's a great graphic, a simplistic graphic, some might say, of our electric service system today. So you have power plants on the left, and then of course, transmission lines, big high voltage transmission lines crossing long distances in the middle. And then we step down electricity to a lower voltage that you can use at your home or small business, and that's delivered via the distribution lines. So a lot of folks talk about transmission lines being comparable to the interstate highways for electric service, whereas the distribution lines are like the neighborhood roads that you might drive on. In Virginia, again, a company like Appalachian Power and a company like Dominion Energy does own each of these pieces in places where they serve. So Dominion does own some generation, they own some long distance transmission lines, and then they own the wires that actually connect to your house. So next slide, please. And here's a great map of the Virginia electric service territories. The yellow on the map is the area that Dominion serves, and you might notice that is also covers the population centers of Virginia. So they are our largest utility by the number of folks that they serve. So you've got the Northern Virginia and Richmond areas and Virginia Beach areas, the population centers in yellow. The big red area in the southwestern part of the state is served by Appalachian Power. And then we've got 13 electric cooperatives, mostly in rural areas, except for Northern Virginia has a Northern Virginia Electric Co-op. And then you've got some cities as well. I think we have 16 municipal utilities. I see a question coming in. Is there a legend for the map? What each color means. Again, the red is Appalachian Power's service territory. The yellow is Dominion service territory. I can't go through all of them right now, but we can dive in.
I can share that later, Peter.
Yeah, about your specific utility later. And so let's go to the next slide. So at App Voices, we're starting to think about, okay, that was kind of I just gave you kind of 3 slides on the electric utility system of the past. It's kind of like past to present, but there's a lot of technologies that have advanced, a lot of policies have advanced, so that we can kind of rebuild our electric system in a way that is cleaner and cheaper and that better serves people like you and me. So part of this is encapsulated in a concept that we did not invent, but some other smart people came up with, called energy democracy. And I'm just going to read this quote for you. It means bringing energy resources under public or community ownership and or control. And it's an essential step towards building a more just, equitable, sustainable, and resilient economy. So, you know, what we're seeing here is the possibility of shifting from a centralized, monopoly-controlled system towards a system in which you and I have a little bit more influence over what our electric system looks like. So with the next slide, what I mean by that, we kind of view this as kind of 3 buckets. Communities, in our view, should have a little bit more control over how their electricity is generated or produced, where energy resources are located. And you might think of a power station immediately. This could be kind of the good and the bad, right? Like I might want to place a solar panel on my roof or locate a battery storage pack in my garage. I might also want to not be located near a polluting energy resource like a pipeline or a coal-fired power station. So we're kind of talking about all kinds of locational aspects there on point number 2. And then the third point is how much energy costs. So customers should have a little bit more influence and control over the cost of the product, because it's an essential product. So let's go to the next slide. So kind of going to that first point, how energy is produced. This is a time where we can be moving from polluting resources to clean resources. And this is kind of, this event this evening is intended to focus on the how electric energy is generated. So more on this later. Next slide, please. Here's a snapshot. This is the percentages of, this is sort of where your electricity comes from if you live in Dominion service territory. So you can see the big green chunk of the pie chart as the most recent data is natural gas. The big blue chunk is nuclear. I don't know if you can read that. Surprising to some, we only produce about 9% of our electricity from coal in Virginia, again, for Dominion folks. Then you've got a little slice of solar there at 1%. Not a whole lot of wind going on yet, but things are changing rapidly. So next slide, please. So the where, again, kind of point number 2 on energy democracy, centralized electric power production versus distributed power production, where you may be able to have a solar panel or a turbine on your farm, or a wind turbine, that is, or maybe a battery storage unit in your garage, or maybe just a smart thermostat, or maybe a smart water heater that helps you manage your electricity use a little bit more. That's another energy resource. So next slide, please. On the cost piece, essentially, you know, this gets kind of deep into the weeds really quickly of like how we are billed for electricity. There's a volume piece, just straight up how much do you use? Can you conserve? Can you be more efficient? And then there's also a piece that the regulator plays a big role in terms of how our rates are structured and how large of fixed fees can be billed to customers each month. This gets to be a justice issue because electric energy today is essential for participating in our society. We all saw it during the pandemic, online school, you name it, you had to do it. You had to have electricity to run your air conditioning, to run your dryer, and to go to school online, to apply for jobs online. So a big issue here is are we able to provide this service reliably and at a price that everyone can afford? So next slide. So focusing in on the generation piece, why does it matter how our power is produced? Of course, Appalachian Voices is an environmental organization, so climate change is a big piece of this, and other traditional pollutants. We want to be moving towards cleaner resources. We also want to keep resilience in mind because of the essential nature of electricity to our daily lives. We want something that's not going to break. And maybe microgrids, maybe Scott can tell us a little bit about how that might work. Next slide. Also the cost piece. Renewables have gotten super cheap relative to the last decade. So this is kind of like a hard to read chart, but basically what you're seeing on the far left, the cheaper resources tend to be really large scale solar and really large scale wind at the moment, compared to some of the things like coal and gas. And so just kind of summing it all up here, the framework, we want communities, the people who are impacted by the system, the people who pay for the system, to have a little bit more control over how power is produced, where those resources are located, and how much they cost. And I think at this point, I'm gonna hand it back to Emily.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Well, I hope that was a good introduction to energy democracy for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept. But now we're going to turn to our speakers. So I want to start by introducing PJ Wilson, who's the president of the Solar and Energy Storage Association of Puerto Rico. I'm really happy to have him here with us tonight. He is a recognized expert on renewable and energy efficiency policy. In 2006, PJ co-created Renew Missouri, the first and only nonprofit dedicated to clean energy policy development in his home state. And that was where I got my start in clean energy. In 2017, PJ relocated to Puerto Rico to help catalyze the clean energy transition there after Hurricane Maria devastated the island with the most severe electric blackout in the history of the nation. He established a nonprofit called Solar for Puerto Rico, which purchased and distributed over 2,000 small solar systems to families without electricity. He then founded the nonprofit, the Solar and Energy Storage Association of Puerto Rico, which became the local affiliate of the Solar Energy Industries Association. Here, PJ played a key role in the development of Puerto Rico's 100% renewable energy and 30% energy efficiency laws. He has represented the clean energy industry in numerous regulatory proceedings, has been featured in Forbes, PV Magazine, and other publications, and promotes clean energy adoption on local TV and radio. PJ, we're really happy to have you with us. I am going to pull up your slides here, so bear with me just a moment.
Excellent. And while you do this, guess what, everybody? Surprise, it's not just me, it's also Javier Rua, who works with me here on everything we do in Puerto Rico. So we're going to do a little back and forth here, if that's all right.
That sounds great.
Cool. Awesome. Is it go time?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Okay, excellent. Well, the nonprofit that we run together here now is called SESA, the Solar and Energy Storage Association of Puerto Rico. You might be familiar with SEIA, which is the national advocacy group for solar, the Solar Energy Industries Association. They have affiliates around the nation. In Missouri, there's MOSIA. We created that too as a spinoff of Renew Missouri. But here in Puerto Rico, I came after shortly after Hurricane Maria and saw that there was no organized solar association like this. So we created it. It was a little 3.5 years ago, and now we just basically focus on public policy that results in more solar and storage moving forward. These are the things that we do for our member companies. We let them know what's going on. We try to influence decisions that are being made in the public policy arena by legislators and regulators and whatnot. and ultimately cultivate good policy that results in more solar and storage. So we have more solar and storage. These are the member companies we have here now. So that is an introduction to what SESA is. Okay, so brief overview on Puerto Rico. This is 2 pictures of Puerto Rico when I did not live here. This is before and after Hurricane Maria came in 2017 and knocked the power grid out for many months for most people on the island. It still today is by far the most fragile power grid in the United States of America. There has been federal funding that's basically built things up to the way it was before Hurricane Maria, but that was really fragile. And so now things are built largely to the way they were before, but it's super fragile. And where Puerto Rico goes from here is a big question mark, probably because of the strong support at the federal level and locally, things will go in a renewable energy direction. But I think what we're talking about here is communities that are losing their patience and saying, well, maybe, but we got to do what we can now to take control of our energy choices. Javier was living here during Hurricane Maria. Anything to add?
Well, I'm part of this community, and I'm an individual that went from depending on a diesel, a gas power generator to solar and storage. Decision to have resiliency for me and my family, and I did it, and now my whole neighborhood is almost there. So it's something that multiplies when you see when it starts happening. It starts growing by itself, and that's what's happening. Puerto Rico is building roof by roof, a large distributed generation ecosystem, a growing virtual power plant actually that's happening right now because of the fact of our weak grid. So yeah, that's me.
We are innovating by necessity here in Puerto Rico. So there's 3 examples that we're going to highlight briefly here. Feel free to reach out. You can always find me through Emily, I'm sure, if you want to have more details about this sort of stuff. There are a lot more examples than this, but I thought we would tell you about a rural town that's building their own microgrid, a community that recently completed a group buy program, and then a town that's basically building a municipal utility that'll be able to function separate from the grid. But I forgot to mention, do you want to mention Casa Pueblo? Because they probably are the best example of a community that's taken.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of energy self-determination going on also. Not based on that distrust of authorities and the utility and the lack of trust in the grid itself. And there's a very important project happening as we speak. It exists already in the mountains of Utuado and other municipalities. It's a project called Casa Pueblo. It's gotten some notoriety stateside. You can look it up, Casa Pueblo. Basically, it's the community sophisticating itself by its own bootstraps and putting solar in community roofs that are basically, connected in series and batteries connected in series, and people giving power to themselves. So it's a disrupting kind of in a good way example of people just going forward and doing things without asking permission, even from governmental authorities. So look it up. It's very interesting, and I forget how many megawatts it's working with right now, but it's constantly growing and hooking people in.
Yeah, Casa Pueblo is great, and they probably are the inspiration for these 3 projects we're going to highlight today. That they're pretty well known locally here. So
it's interesting that Casa Pueblo, from the environmental and community perspective, it's a second generation of community organizers. The first generation, the dad there, basically fought an open mining operation that was going to happen there in the 60s, just by community organizing. So they basically woke up the community opposing that in the 60s, and that community stayed organized as an environmental movement, and now it's an environmental and energy self-determination movement that is out there giving lessons to everybody. So look it up.
All right, and
Okay,
Peter, do you want to just let me know when to change
sure,
slides?
next slide.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll go cha-ching every time it's ready for the next slide. So
All right, got it.
Cha-ching is like money. What is that?
like money, yeah. Okay, so the first one is in a town called Toro Negro. This is one of the first towns I heard about when I got here during the blackout. They developed their own community microgrid, cha-ching. Here's some details about it. There was a local community foundation that came together with a local solar company that created their own nonprofit. It's just 28 houses. It's a remote town of 28 houses. So their microgrid is a network of 1, 2, or 3 houses that are connected together. So it's not one completely integrated microgrid, but it's groups of houses that are together. This town is interesting because it was already organized on a water perspective. They're too far away to be connected to the island's centralized water system. So they already had a community system of collecting money to pay for the water pipes when they fixed and whatnot. So it wasn't that big of a leap for them to go to say, let's just do the same thing with energy.
If you're interested in that, these are called non-PRASA water systems. PRASA is the Puerto Rico Aqueducts and Sewer Authority. You can look it up, non-PRASA water systems.
These are just a couple of pictures from that project. Apparently people are happy because that's an after picture. I know it took longer than they thought. It took a few months for it to all come together. But there's one other organization that helped there, the Puerto Rico Science Trust. Puerto Rico Science, Technology, and Research Trust is a really stable institution here that we love to partner with whenever we can. Cha-ching. Okay, here's example number 2. This just finished just now. Some of you might be familiar with Solar United Neighbors. They're a big national nonprofit that it works nationally. I think they're active in 12 of the states with these kind of group buy programs where they'll go in with this awesome model. They partner with nonprofits and they say, okay, we're going to teach everybody in this town or in this neighborhood the basic 101 principles of solar and what you need to know to feel comfortable going forward for 2 months. And then we're going to have 1 month where people can sign up. And the more people that sign up, the cheaper it is. Because for solar companies, they have this thing called cost of customer acquisition. It takes a lot of money to reach customers and to go through the education process. So if nonprofits can come in and help kind of bridge that, then it just ends up being cheaper and you have a lot more houses that can go solar simultaneously. So for this project, it was a suburb of San Juan, and they had about 60 houses in this neighborhood. And everybody got well educated and had the opportunity to sign up, and about a third of them, 20 people signed up. They just finished construction on the first 18 houses. They all have solar and storage, and then they're finishing the last 2 right now. Cha-ching. Okay, and the third example is a town called Villalba. And this was just a couple of weeks ago. It was finalized.
That's misspelled, by the way.
How do you spell Villalba?
It's on top. Villalba.
Oh,
Villa Alba. It's White Village.
Oh my God.
There you go.
All right.
But it's fine.
We got to start over in the beginning. Okay, Villalba is this mountain town that has, during the blackout, they had a hydroelectric dam that was sitting there doing nothing. And it was just crazy. The days, the weeks, the months were going on, and they have a hydroelectric dam right there. So the community fixed it. They went there and just hot wired it, MacGyvered it together. I don't know how they did it, but they got that thing going so they could at least have some electricity there locally. They made their case, and the Puerto Rico government said, you know what, if you'll take care of that hydroelectric dam, you can have it. So it's now the centerpiece of a project that they have to go off grid or to be able to operate during island-wide blackouts for that town and 4 other surrounding towns. Again, a lot slower. It's almost 4 years after Hurricane Maria at this point, but that is finally, that's an example of a community that's went on their own.
And there's been a lot of leadership by local mayors there. Basically, the mayor of Villalba has been a leader to organize those other municipalities and the communities within to basically jerry-rig that MacGyver that dam into power and getting this moving. So leadership matters.
Basics of the project there. Cha-ching. Great, and that's it. So feel free to like us if you're interested in Puerto Rico. You can follow us on Facebook or Twitter, where we announce things in real time, what's going on. Thank you. Feel so honored to be in the company of the presenters here this evening, and we'll be around later if anybody has questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Javier, and thank you, Peter, for those inspiring stories of communities taking control of their power systems.
PJ, Emily, my name is PJ, not Peter.
Oh my God. Okay, I am so sorry. I know that. Thanks for correcting me. Yes, thank you,
Forgive me
Javier
this
and
time.
Peter. All right, so I'm going to move us on to Gil. Please bear with me while I transition to my other screen here. Okay, so can you all see the slide with the speaker names and photos?
I can.
Okay, great. So I'm happy to welcome Gail Huff, the Executive Director and founding member of the Tennessee Solar Energy Industries Association, with us tonight to share an inspiring story of community solar development in Eastern Tennessee. But first, Gil was born in Detroit, Michigan, and raised on the waters of Lake St. Clair. After graduating from Grand Valley State University, he left for various adventures, including several years of nonviolent reconciliation work in Northern Ireland, working with refugees from Central America, and teaching English as a second language. He now resides in Knoxville, Tennessee, where he has organized Appalachian communities, worked as the Tennessee Director of Renewable Programs at the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and developed renewable energy projects. He is a founding member of the Tennessee Solar Energy Industries Association, where he serves as executive director today and advocates for the orderly and sustained development of solar energy in Tennessee. In his free time, he writes fiction. Over to you, Gil.
Great, thanks. All right. So as you mentioned, I'm executive director of Tennessee. Similar to PJ in Puerto Rico, it's up here in Tennessee. And we work mainly focused on the market dominated by the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA. And our members are solar companies who are trying to build the market here. Next slide. So Emily mentioned the kind of reason I was kind of brought in this discussion is the work that I've done with the community of Pleasant Hill, with the Gainer Solar Array in Pleasant Hill, which is a project to hopefully start construction this fall. It's been a long, hard battle, and I deserve none of the credit for this. I have been dragged for a number of years by the local community, but while they are tirelessly advocating for what they've wanted to do, they don't always like to speak publicly, so I got thrown in here for some reason. But it's really a story of a group. Pleasant Hill is
Oh, if folks could keep themselves on mute, that would be great. Thanks.
Pleasant Hill is mainly a retirement community. They're in a really rural area. They've had problems with power outages for as long as a week. And I think particularly there includes a nursing home that they've had real concerns about. And I think partly because of those vulnerabilities, they've been fairly engaged in looking at opportunities. Their local co-op that they belong to, Volunteer Energy, has been a pretty good partner. But I will say Gail, who's the chair in the community, has really given them no choice. they have been, I'm really one of their targets more than a person that deserves any credit. Gail will call me every week wanting to know, has this moved as that? She does that with VEC. She does that with TVA. She's done that with all the partners. They've had regular meetings, but they finally were able to get a PPA, a power purchase agreement for a project. One of the community members owns a farm that's going to host this. The visual there is a drawing of the array. It's a 4 megawatt DC, 3 megawatt AC project. The community is only 500 people, so it's a small community, again, mostly retirees. The volunteer is, they were planning on doing a storage project somewhere on there. They have their territory goes all the way from the Kentucky to the Alabama border. So they're very large, but very rural, small population cooperative. But because of this project, they're looking at putting the storage there. And they also got a grant with MIT to do a visual microgrid project that Tennessee Tech is now actually doing most of the work for. And they're looking at making this a real showcase of a project, leveraging those other things. But really, this is all about a community that literally this has been going on for close to 5 years. They kept being told, no, can't do this. This program is closed, for this reason or another. And they just refused to accept no until they finally got a yes. So um, this isn't a community solar project. There are a lot of business models for lease buy-ins and stuff like that, often run by utilities. This is simply a community that wanted a project to power their community, and they were able to do it. And very, very exciting that TVA and Volunteer have now both agreed that do this project and go forward. And we're going to be very excited to actually break ground. But none of us will be excited as the community itself, from the mayor on down, that has really just pulled this together. The exciting thing here, though, that I would really want to leverage this into is something new that can let this kind of opportunity happen across more of the Tennessee Valley. Next slide. So not directly parallel, though, I'd say the community has gone in front of the TVA board and demanded renewables, but separately to that, for the most part, is the local power companies have gotten the rights, the co-ops and the munis. TVA generates traditionally the big power with nuclear plants, coal plants, natural gas plants that feeds 145 local power companies that are usually either city-run municipals or rural cooperatives. This is a map of those. But TVA has recently negotiated with them the ability to self-generate up to 5% of their load. Now that they've gotten that, they're now looking at 10%. But and so there is a number of community scale requests for proposals to do similar size projects to Gainer, from pretty much 1 to 20 megawatts. What's interesting, though, as well, a number of about 44 of the 154 local power companies are really moving forward with projects. Really, it's to save money. Solar is now on this scale cheaper than the power they can buy from TVA. And under this self-generation contract, they can offset at the cost that they normally would buy power from TVA by paying to buy power from solar projects. And this can generally be done cheaper than what they get from TVA. So this actually reduces the price of power for the whole local community. So it's a real win. But really, out of the 140 that can do it, only about half of that number is actually going forward. So I would argue there really is a need. I mean, really, there is no reason not to do this, because it reduces everybody's bill, and it, no carbon clean solar projects. And there is a great opportunity to do like Pleasant Hill has done. And really, like, the Pleasant Hill community, in addition to building the solar project, they're going to be having a pollinator plants. They're going to be doing education with the local school. They really feel like they own this array, even though really investors will be owning it. But they have negotiated a ton of ability to really complement the solar project. And now in the Tennessee Valley, with the new partnership projects, there is great opportunity for local driven projects that can let people have this scale of solar that they want, and it will just reduce everybody's bills. It's just a fantastic opportunity. So I always like it when something good can be actually be duplicated. And it really wasn't that opportunity when we were mainly doing a lot of the gainer work, but there really is now. Next slide. I will mention, if you're interested at all in the TVA market, we do have several things coming up. Big one is our conference, which will be on Wednesday, October 13th this fall. We are a professional association, so attending our conferences, there is a cost to that. But talk to me if for some reason somebody can't. But if you're interested, it is open to attend the Tennessee Valley Solar Conference plus Storage event on October 13th. In addition, we have 2 webinars coming up. One on getting LEED credits for sustainability for your solar project going into your homes and businesses, which is on July 28th, and one on energy storage. That'll be on August 25th as part of our education outreach. So just email me if you're interested and want more information, or just go to our website. Next slide. So this is just a few pictures of projects that I've worked on. Most of these are 1 megawatt projects. The one there kind of in the middle is actually on a landfill. Most of these are on industrial sites. Solar is a fantastic use for sites that have limited use. You probably wouldn't want to be farming on these particular sites because of past uses of the sites. But many, greenfield sites, you can, projects are becoming more and more multi-use. So the solar project is really a win-win across the board. And anybody interested in solar in Tennessee or the Tennessee Valley region, there's my contact information. I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time.
Awesome. Thank you, Gil. Really love that story of the Pleasant Hill community. They just worked so hard for so long to see this project come through, and just an inspiring thing to hear about. So thank you. With that, we will turn it over to our last presenter. Everyone, please help me welcome Scott Sklar. He's our closest to home resident expert based in Arlington, Virginia. He's president of the Stella Group Limited and has been since the year of 2000. It's a global clean technology firm which facilitates clean distributed energy utilization and technology integration, primarily for commercial, industrial, and institutional purposes, as well as for infrastructure and local government. Scott is also an adjunct professor at the George Washington University, where he teaches 3 unique interdisciplinary courses on sustainable energy. He also serves as the energy director of George Washington University's Environment and Energy Management Institute. Previously, Scott served for 15 years as executive director of the solar energy industries and was the Washington director and acting research director of the National Center for Appropriate Technology. He lives in a self-powered solar home in Arlington, Virginia, where he enjoys solar water heating, geothermal heating and cooling, and a photovoltaics and battery system. The Stella Group Limited also has a Zero Energy Virginia office building with photovoltaic roofing shingles, a small wind turbine, and a hydrogen fuel cell tied to a battery bank. Sounds really cool. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Scott and pull up his presentation here in just a moment.
And thank you, Emily. And I will do a ka-ching as well when I first moving slides. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. We should be loading. Sorry, my internet is being slow all of a sudden. There we go. Can you see it?
Yes, I see
Okay.
So thank you, everybody. My company blends technologies, and it's, as Emily said, it's 21 years old. So before microgrids that I'm talking about today, we call them hybrid systems. And I only do hybrid system projects, meaning renewables, high value energy efficiency, and energy storage. I don't do single technology projects. And I do them for third world villages, data centers, cell towers, pipelines, hospitals, and community, and lately low income community and community solar or community renewable projects. So this is the best picture I could find. My class who's on this webinar today from GW has seen this before. And as you can see, this is a blend of different technologies. It's usually around, the older ones were around diesel engines, and of course diesel is not clean. The newer ones are without diesel engines usually. Sometimes they have a little propane or natural gas, but mostly they're battery banks surrounded by renewable energy on site, which could be solar photovoltaics, small wind, anaerobic digesters for biogas, micro hydro, waste heat to electric. So, and we have software that coordinates it with the technologies working together with the battery storage device and with the end use load, whatever it can be. If it's tied to the electric utility, and I have to say 2/3 of mine are not, but the third that are, if there is a sense that the utility is going to have an interruption, usually it means it's starting to flicker, the software will absolutely passively separate from the grid. No one that's attached to the microgrid will even see a blink, and it will power what it's supposed to power. Ka-ching. So I put a slide here. The microgrids are growing hugely. I'll use that term, and there's a lot of reasons for it. I want to remind you, since we're talking about environmental justice today, that low-income people and low-income communities have the least reliable power. They have the most expensive power, and they have the worst power quality, meaning they have surges, sags, and transients, which ruin their appliances, their smartphones, anything they have. And so microgrids really are brought on to make sure you have absolutely cost-effective, reliable, resilient, and clean electricity. That's why we're doing it. And the costs since about 2015 have been comparable or lower than what you can get from the electric grid. And of course, much lower than you can get from a diesel engine. Next, ka-ching. This is a nice chart because it shows where microgrids are going. And so government, military bases, and hospitals, of course, are using it. Owner financing, which is predominantly corporations, but even small businesses are actually using it more than big businesses. Where you have advanced states like California, Illinois, New York, Maryland, they are including microgrids in the rate base, meaning if the utility or the locality believes it's in their interest and they have a good case for it, you can go to the regulatory commission and make your case and have it included in the rate base. And other are folks who just want absolutely reliable power and energy as a service. Usually it means green power, but it also can be reliable power. Next, ka-ching. So what's the goal here? Why do we do microgrids? The goal is you want reliability, you want low or zero emissions, and not just greenhouse gases, but the Clean Air Act regulated emissions, nitrous oxide, sulfur oxide, mercury, and particulates. You want stable electric rates. You want to hit ratepayers that have limited access or no choice or want to be green. You need some land for a microgrid. They can be tiny, like at a building, or within a corporate or institutional campus, like a university or a hospital. Or if it's tied to the grid and larger for the community, you need some land. And just like community solar, with the presentation before, a lot of community solar land is donated by either the local government or a company where they have a brownfield or a closed plant or a university, and they'll give it to you for $1 a year and near a power line so you can connect to the grid. Proven financial approach, just like solar, we do power purchase agreements, leasing, shared savings, sometimes crowdfunding for my overseas third world projects. There's lots of ways to make these microgrids pencil out to anyone, from the poorest people on the planet to the more well-off people on the planet. Ka-ching. I'm trying to bop through here. So this is one of the things that was actually not mentioned in the start of this webinar. There's a big move towards community choice aggregation. And that's a funny term, CCA. But what it really means is that states are moving to allow communities to determine who their electricity provider is. And so it could be the formation of a new utility, or selecting a utility, or using a microgrid, or using a community solar project. And there is a Virginia nonprofit here that specializes in community choice aggregation. They've done a study, which I need to share with you all, so you can access and get involved in that movement right here in Virginia. Ka-ching. So this is an article a few years ago about the Maryland utility and what they're trying to do in giving some microgrids that the state has approved. And actually, if you go on the link at the bottom of the slide on Microgrid Knowledge, which is a newsletter on microgrids, you can learn about how they're blending these different technologies. Next, please. Ka-ching. So this was last year, and this is, I think, the first microgrid on the East Coast that is for affordable housing in Washington, D.C. And so, you know, it's really wonderful. And the whole effort, again, is to provide absolutely clean and reliable power in particularly older buildings where the electric grid connections are old, and you don't have the power quality and reliability that a lot of other people do in the region. So this is the first time we were able to do something with a low income bent in the Washington metropolitan area. Ka-ching. I want to praise, first of all, PJ has been a colleague, a good colleague and friend of mine for a long time from back in Missouri. And like a crazy man went to Puerto Rico right after it went into the dark and lived through it. But one of the efforts of the industry and PJ has been to get really the first microgrid rule in the country, and then Hawaii has followed suit. So these two places are leading in the regulatory regimes for microgrids to link to the grid. I have another thought on this, but I'll do that later. Next, ka-ching. We're stuck.
Scott, I think those are all the slides that you sent me.
Oh, I think there may be 4, but that's okay. So I want to talk to you about microgrids in a couple of quick summaries. One is that microgrids don't have to be connected to the grid. And actually, most of the microgrids I do are blended systems, and you do not need any regulatory control if you have a condominium area where it's on the same ownership of the land, or a corporate campus. So there are a lot of ways to get around the regulatory rules, and we're starting to do that a lot in the Southeast, where low-income communities have really inferior electric grid connections. So I really want to make sure for you that as you're thinking about possibilities in your area, to look the idea that you may not need your electric utility approval and the regulatory approval to get into it. Lastly, I am a big believer in monitoring, and there are a lot of companies, a few of them right here in Virginia, that have software that monitor electric power quality and reliability. And if you can prove that you have inferior power quality or electric reliability, and you have more outages or surges than normal, you will be able to get a project going because your electric utility isn't living up to the standard it needs to do as a provider. and there are many of us who are here to help you. I am able to be contacted. Again, I am a professor, so I have more studies and reports on these issues of microgrids, community solar, and energy access than probably anybody around. I have 2 buildings that are totally self-powered in Arlington, Virginia, 3 blocks from the Clarendon Metro, with about a 40 commercially available energy efficiency, renewable energy, energy storage technologies. So you can touch it. I give weekly tours for primarily engineers and architects and government procurement officials, but anyone is welcome, and I welcome you. And they can provide my email on this. And lastly, I do want to say that these systems are getting smarter, lower cost, and more reliable than they already have been in the past. And I see this as part of the fabric of electricity and energy, as much as cell phones and the internet have come in. And so I want to remind you, and I want you to think about this, that what cellular did is have basically allowable to have a self-healing grid, meaning if a cell tower goes down, 3 of them triangulate and you don't lose service. That's true with data centers and the internet. When a data center goes down, which happens every month, you don't lose your internet. The data centers triangulate around the gap and take over. When you have microgrids, they will be able to do the same thing for electricity. So we are sort of the 3rd wave in mimicking these self-healing grids. And that is the goal. Access carbon neutral, or actually carbon free, and absolutely low cost and reliable. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation, Scott. And thank you for bearing with my mistake with your slides and going off script there.
No problem. I handled it well.
Very helpful. Yeah, I agree. So now with that, I'm going to stop my screen share for a moment and we can open it up. We will lose Scott early.
Yeah, I have to teach my class tonight, everyone. I'm sorry. So I'm going to sneak off in a few minutes here.
Yeah, well, we very much appreciate your time. But let's open it up to questions. So if anyone has a question, you can throw it in the chat. You can come off mute. But maybe, first give a big thanks to each of our presenters. I learned a lot. That was really great.
So Emily, I'm happy to kick things off with a question for our wonderful panelists. So first of all, thank you all 4 of you for giving us your time this evening and for your excellent presentations and the conversation. So my question, and Scott, you just started to get into this when you talked about the self-healing grid a little bit there at the end, but for those of us who are not engineers or professors, can any of y'all say a little bit more about, because resilience is sort of, reliability of service has been a theme in all of your presentations. Can y'all just say a little bit about, why distributed energy resources and microgrids are complementary and how they build resilience?
Sure. I think I'll start with that since I'm leaving first. By blending technologies with energy storage means you have all the generation feeding into a battery. What's nice about batteries is they don't have moving parts. So unlike a diesel engine, which many times doesn't start up, by the way, during Hurricane Sandy, we had 5 hospitals that had diesel engines that had to move people out of operating rooms during their operation. Of course, either the diesel engines didn't work or they ran out of diesel fuel. And guess what? During an emergency, you can't get delivery of diesel fuel. It's ridiculous. And you can't repair diesel engines. So by batteries not having moving parts is one key issue. The other issue is that most of the renewables are right there on site, meaning they cannot be disturbed. In fact, in hurricanes and storms, the small wind turbines work all the time. Before the storm, obviously, you're charging up with solar, and even with clouds, I can still get 20 or 30% of the power out of these panels into the battery banks. And of course, I have water technologies. And if there's waste on site, biogas for canneries and farming manures and rotting crops, you can have no supply chain. So you don't need your diesel fuel or your propane delivered on site. So microgrids, by definition, are just more secure, and they don't have a fuel train. The batteries don't have moving parts. Frankly, most of the renewables don't have many moving parts. So it's just a more reliable, resilient architecture. And lastly, I want to say one of the things I did to my two buildings in Arlington is I reduced the electricity I used by about 40% of the average home in my community. Absolutely cost effective, by the way. A little nutty when I did it in the 80s. But the point being, it made economic sense. And now, because I use so much less electricity than anybody else, I have more options on what I can do to power it on site. And so a lot of these studies I see that say renewables can't do it and all that is because these electric loads are ridiculous. So use LED lights and insulation and double pane windows and thermal barrier paints and reflective coatings and all these things we have on the market that are absolutely cost effective. So sorry I went a little longer, but that's hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Gil, PJ, Javier, did y'all want to contribute to that answer on the complementary nature of sort of distributed solar batteries, doing a microgrid, and what it can do for reliability or even for saving money?
Oh my, well, first of all, Gil reminded me, I forgot to announce that tomorrow ticket sales go live for our next big industry summit here in Puerto Rico.
Thanks, Gil.
Maybe wants an excuse to actually come visit us in mid-August at the Vivo Beach Club. That's the name of the conference place, Vivo Beach Club. Don't you want to come?
In person and in front of the beach.
PJ, we're trying not to get arrested here. This is a wholesome webinar, please.
It's not a bathing suit kind of conference, though. I don't think. No, it's a regular conference.
Clothing optional, but solar obligatory.
We'll see. We're still in the beginning stages, but no. Tomorrow on our website is cesapr.org. So if you go there and click conference, there's just a save the date thing now. But soon, very soon, you'll be able to actually.
Now to Peter's question.
Now, if your question, oh my gosh, nobody in Puerto Rico wants solar without the storage. And that's what people want is the battery, because that's what keeps the lights on when the power goes out. It just makes sense to have solar while you're at it. It makes sense to electric vehicle while you're at it, if you can, but it's the battery that is the center of everyone's desires here energetically, because the power grid is so crappy and the generation units are so poor and unreliable and go offline all the time.
There's even a case in Puerto Rico for batteries without solar, like in apartment buildings. So batteries are so critical by themselves that it's a very particular market, for urban areas.
I think it's the biggest market in the nation, in the world, maybe, for Tesla Powerwall batteries, second only to California.
I think that's true.
It's they had about 10,000 homes with solar, almost none with storage before Hurricane Maria. Now there's 30,000 homes with solar, at least 20,000 of those with storage, maybe 25,000.
There's a question in the chat about a supply. Yeah, I mean, there's the demand for batteries is so high that power walls are in back order and in months from installation, but that's creating opportunities for other great batteries like Enphase and Sonnen and other batteries.
Yeah, just keep in mind the hurricane season here in Puerto Rico goes from June 1st till the end of October or November.
November, really, but
it's hurricane season. If you ask anybody here locally, though, they say if there's going to be a hurricane, it'll be September, because historically that's the peak of that's when hurricanes have happened. So just imagine the anxiety cycle right now. If you decided today to put up solar and storage, the main selling point, if you look at the advertisements right now, is we have batteries in stock right now. Yeah. That's what solar companies are advertising. If
And and the culture in Puerto Rico has been has been used to backup power, generate by generator, at least since Hurricane Hugo, probably since before that. So, but that comes with lots of costs and stresses. I was one of those. Just taking care of a generator, it's not optimal, and the amount of money that you spent in fuel in long-term blackouts like we saw after Maria, it's a lot of money. So then batteries start making sense in ways that are not apparent in the States, but here are really apparent.
Yeah, but there's a month-long back order for some of the most popular brands of batteries here. Yet those same companies are bidding on some of the new RFPs that are coming out for thousands of houses with batteries all at the same time. And we ask them, like, well, why are you even bidding on that? You already have months backlog. Are you selling plenty? And they say, look, we'll build another factory if we have to. If the demand is there, they'll scale up to meet it. Now, what doesn't exist in Puerto Rico is any sort of advanced metering. I mean, this is 1960s technology here, mostly in the grid operation stuff. So batteries are really valuable when the grid goes down to you and your house and your business and your hotel, your hospital, whatever. But they provide no value to the overall grid in general if the utility doesn't even know they're there. If it's not dispatchable, if they can't push a button and say, okay, well, it looks like we're going to have a blackout in 5 minutes unless we reduce some stress on the grid somehow or another. So we do have this 100% renewable energy law that passed 2 years ago. We're going through dozens of regulatory dockets to try and start integrating it. And it is distributed generation, it's large scale solar and storage, it's demand response, it's energy efficiency. It's trying to do all these things, what priority order these things should happen in. And maybe they never would have happened if not for the fact that we have strong support from the federal level now. The Biden administration cares about Puerto Rico, cares about climate change stuff. So it's really a scrambling, okay, how well can we articulate what would work best here? Yeah, I know, sorry, you got some other questions to attend to there, but yeah, definitely some supply chain issues that you can only really find out about best if you come to the Vivo Beach Club in August. I think that's the only way to get the real.
Our secret knowledge shall be shared there.
I have a question, if you don't mind. Hey, PJ, this is Steve Anglin. How are you? I was in Puerto Rico last month.
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah, how are you? I actually wanted to hear a little bit more about long duration storage. I mean, we all know the battery technology. We know the LCOE and the cost of the batteries, and we know the peaker play that they have. Is anyone, I was down there and I know exactly what you're saying is absolutely true. There's a big demand for this. Long duration storage, what's the story with that? Is there anyone doing that down there in Puerto Rico? And by the way, Scott, I just want to say, Scott, I'd like to come down to Virginia and spend the day and take a look at your microgrids, because our company, we do that as well. We do microgrids. Go ahead, PJ.
Well, so there's also, not only does Puerto Rico have 100% renewable energy law, it has 3% renewable energy today. And the first stair step is to go from 3% renewable energy today to 40% in 4 years. 40%. Just, whoa, big step we've been taking there. No one thinks we're actually going to get there, but I mean, what if we had to as a society? That's the exercise we're going through this year. This is the year of everybody try your hardest, because how close can we get to that? So consequently, the law passed, the utilities 20-year planning process happened. It's called the IRP, the Integrated Resource Planning. And the result of that is a series of orders for RFPs, for proposals for building 3,750 megawatts of renewables and 1,500 megawatts of storage. These are the biggest ones in the nation. How are we going to do it? Well, there's an RFP out there. The bid just closed last week for 1,000 megawatts of renewables with 500 megawatts of storage. It's biddable with solar with storage or on storage alone. And the criteria there for duration is they're looking for 4 hours of storage, enough to like shift the peak from the, when you have the most sun in the middle of the afternoon to when you have the biggest demand in the evening. But they're also taking proposals for 2 hours or 6 hours. So that's the sort of high level view on duration of storage, is just trying to shift that peak is what's going on. I haven't really heard discussion of any longer term.
we can get up to 6 hours of storage very easily. So I'll be down there in August.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I will like throw a piece in here. I do agree long duration storage is the next thing that we have 100% renewables. I know TVA is including 4 hours of storage with all their solar RFPs. They're doing about a gigawatt of solar a year right now. It all has to include 4 hours of storage. Beyond that, you can't really get there with lithium ion, which is the predominant technology. So I don't think anybody knows what the chemistry is for long duration storage. I know TVA has a whole research group looking at it. There's a ton of companies working on it. If you there's a lot of very exciting and positive stuff going, and if you know what the best chemistry is for long duration storage, you will be the next billionaire, because the person that cracks it and scales it up, because solar wind is cheaper per kilowatt, but you have to get through the nut. You've got to be able to have long duration storage, and but I don't think the clear winner for that technology is obvious yet.
Thanks
Can
for your
I just
answer,
follow up?
Gil
Can I
and
follow up to what he just
PJ.
said? Can I just follow up to what that young man just said, the TVA? Is that Gil, by the way? I'm not too sure. I came in a little bit late. I think,
Yes.
Gil, you're absolutely right. I think the battery technology is great, but it only lasts for 4 hours. And a lot of the PPAs that I see, they go from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. What do you do after 8 p.m., right? So you're back on the grid. So the argument that Scott was making in his presentation was absolutely brilliant, because when the grid goes down, what do you have, right? Diesel engines, and you do need a microgrid. I think there's a big case for that in Puerto Rico, especially with the outages and the hurricanes that they experience. So, I don't want to take over here, but I'd love to have an offline conversation with you guys.
I'll make sure to share contact information and everything with folks too, so y'all can follow up. But we did have a couple questions come in from Seth and then Mike. So Seth, I don't know if you want to come off mute and ask your question, and then we'll get to Mike after that.
Sure. My question is whether you've encountered opposition or difficult circumstances with utilities as you work on these projects, and if so, how you've dealt with that.
I can take a first crack at that if you like. That used to be almost a joke. Utilities didn't see solar as competition. It was too expensive, but now it's been a radical change now with the low cost technology. There was a recent TVA board meeting of the people that the presidential appointees that run the utility, and one of the Trump appointees that serves on there, who's a retired coal executive, was making the case that, I know coal is more expensive, but we shouldn't close down the Paradise plant because it's the right thing to do for the community. I know it's more expensive than solar, but it's just the right thing to do for that community, which is, by the way, 180 degrees separate from what was being said. There used to be, people would go in and say, solar is more expensive, but it's the right thing to do. We should do it. There is no question that traditional fossil fuels in particular are now fighting for their lives. They're more expensive, they're dirty, but there's also, for the utility, real cost to decommission these. They are active plants with employees. They get a lot of pushback from the local community and representatives when they close these plants. They even though the alternative is cheaper and cleaner, they still are burdened. If they turn off too many plants at once, the cost for cleaning them up and getting them offline is just too much to burden. Really, I think the greatest thing to frack that's not being talked about on the federal front is money to decommission coal plants, because there is a cost to turn them off. And today cleaner technologies are lower cost, but it's asking a lot of the utility because you want to keep your prices down, and there's a real expense there. So absolutely, the coal industry, natural gas industry, utilities are really hesitant to transition to cleaner technologies, not because of any grand conspiracy, but just it's hard to make that transition too quickly and do it in a way that won't shock people.
I'm going to ask a follow-up. So Scott was saying, I'm sorry that we lost Scott here. He had to go do the professor thing. But he mentioned in his presentation, I think I took away that a microgrid could both be totally isolated, or it could actually still attach to the existing grid. And I think on one of his slides, he had an example from Maryland, where there was an RFP out to have the existing, I think it was Pepco, an existing electric utility, partner on some work around a microgrid, which I assume would still be connected to the larger electric grid. And so I guess my question is, Gil, you're in Tennessee where TVA is pretty entrenched. So this is kind of part of Seth's question too about entrenched interests, right? TVA is not going anywhere as far as we know. The LPCs, I don't think that the local power utilities that are housed under TVA, we don't think are going anywhere. And if I were a betting person, I might also bet that Virginia is not going to, every town in Virginia is not going to municipalize in the next decade and leave our existing utilities behind. So do we think that there is a kind of a win-win proposal? Is there like a complementary, like, hey, existing utility with your the stake that you have today, is there a win-win where microgrids can be installed in service territories to increase reliability, lower costs, and it's still the utilities aren't fighting it? Is that a possibility? Maybe in Tennessee. I have no idea what the dynamic is in Puerto Rico,
But it's going on here. Yeah, no, every, I mean, to some extent, microgrid simply means you have a smart grid instead of a dumb grid. You're not just generating power here and it goes into the grid and goes somewhere. You can channel, you can turn off things, you can isolate, you can, power goes out in this direction. Well, now you can have the ability to channel it and put it where it's needed. And the more smarter your grid is, the more ability local distributed generation can meet that need. And so your ability to do renewables increases. Yeah, I mean, putting in fiber optics and smart connectors, every local power company I know, TVA not so much because they're big power, big generator, just sitting it on the huge grid. But the local power companies, if they're not doing it, they're studying on the next steps to do it. Simply because it gives them more ability, short blackouts. Reliability is driving. It's really about reliability. But then also, they're very interested in doing solar to power that. So yes, no, purely that is happening with new technology. Every grid improvement is usually an upgrade on the technology from previous improvements.
All right, thank you, Gil. We did have one more question from Mike, and I think his question was for PJ, and then maybe after that we'll wrap it up, and I'll share contact information again just so you all can follow up with each other. But Mike, go ahead.
Thank you. PJ, this question is for you based on my experience in Puerto Rico. We knew PREPA was bad before Maria. We knew PREPA was even worse after Maria. We have our reservations and doubts about LUMA. If I were to take, or if Project Footprint, for instance, were to take one of their portable units, could they go to one of your microgrids and plug it in and provide additional battery power and additional solar capacity? That's question one. And question two, I'll be in Puerto Rico from November to March. Would you be willing to entertain me perhaps one day at the remote site up in the mountains where we could take a look at how that microgrid functions?
Well, I'm from Missouri originally, so I always encourage my friends and family to visit in that same time frame, November to February. It's a good time to get out of the cold and come down to Puerto Rico, where the weather's the same all the time. So yeah, I'd be happy to see you down here. And I think actually our next big conference will be in January or February after this one in August. So maybe you'll be around while that's going on. So yeah, be happy to see you down here. And the Footprint Project, I'm familiar with those guys, Will, and I did a little bit of coordination with them early on during the blackout originally. They do awesome portable solar and storage power units. You know, if everything was going great, you could use them for just throwing a concert in the middle of a field or something. But during blackouts, that's super valuable. You know, who's got that solar and storage trailer that that they could plug in? I think it's more for the community driven things though, from what I've seen. I helped set up something similar to that for a hospital in Isabella when their generation failed. 3 layers of backup generation failed. So we ended up setting up a solar and storage trailer kind of thing that helped some. But I think that's for the like large scale PREPA interconnection stuff is what we're hearing is more either the traditional solar farm or the network of distributed generation that is permanently screwed into your roof, the virtual power plant model. But during a disaster, that's what everybody wants, is access to the mobile, you know, can you bring power to my house? Maybe we'll see a lot more of that with the electric vehicles, with the Ford electric truck coming out and Cybertruck and the other EVs getting enabling vehicle to grid kind of stuff. But yeah, the Footprint Project is an awesome nonprofit that's done some great work here during the blackout and is still, after Maria, and is still doing good work here. I haven't talked to Will in a while, so I'd love an update on how that project's going. Or you know what, most recent thing I heard is he was coordinating with a fireman and recently retired in Nevada named Richard Burt, who is helping to get some solar and storage on fire stations and now into the homes of firefighters and other critical facilities workers. So that, you know, you can look at that as a community, the community of firefighters or the community of policemen or the community of nurses. That's where I see more of the mobile power solution sort of things coming from a bottom up level. But that said, there's a lot of federal funding for bottom up stuff that should be flowing soon. So I think there's, I'd love to brainstorm potential use cases for that approach.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. And I don't remember if it was you or someone else that asked a previous question about like, what if your utility doesn't go along with this? But where I'm from in Missouri, that's how Renew Missouri got its roots, is because Ameren did not want to go solar or wind or anything else. So we created a whole campaign, 1,000 volunteers, raised $1 million and did a ballot measure to force them to go renewable. And they were the bad actor there for sure. And that's pretty common. Sometimes utilities are friendly, but I know Solar United Neighbors does some organizing with rural electric cooperatives, the cooperatives that are, you know, utilities are just kind of by nature like a slow lumbering elephant that's going in one direction. So to kind of get their attention, you know, or you think if you play the game Monopoly, the utility is the thing that's just stable. You land on it, you pay the $25 or whatever. You know, by nature, they're just kind of go in one direction.
Jail, it's also pretty stable in Monopoly.
The jail, yeah, that's even
jail.
More stable is jail.
You know, we use the Monopoly board kind of imagery in some of our energy democracy literature and slides and things like that. So that's totally apt.
Excellent. I'll send you my address. We'll look forward to the Spanish translated version whenever you get a chance.
All right. Well, that might be slow in coming, but we can do our best.
I'll help out.
Well, you'll help. All right, great. Love making connections like this. So it's close to 7. I really want to thank Javier, Peter,